Okay, parents, so your child has a smartphone in their hand now. I think we could all agree that your children need some kinds of rules, some kind of structure, and some kind of consequences. Well, I can tell you, parents, I know we're all well-meaning and well-intentioned. You did not foresee some of the difficulties that you are currently experiencing now that your child has the smartphone. It was probably the happiest day in their life when they got it in their hands. So what I'm going to talk to you about in this video are ways to actually effectively set limits, have structure that makes sense, that's reasonable, but most importantly, and this is the area where I see parents fall short, it's how to actually enforce the consequences in a compassionate, loving way, and again, in a way that makes sense. I'm Dr. Mike Fraser. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have over 30 years of experience working with other people's kids, and I also have 3 of my own. So I have a lot of batting practice in my own home when it comes to how to actually implement these principles. There's really 3 major levels that as a parent, if we're going to create and enforce structure in our households, we have to pay attention to. The first is expectations. The second is rules, and the third is consequences. And I can tell you from experience, most families have expectations. Expectations is the mission and vision statement. Any business that's successful has a mission statement. Everybody that works for that successful company is going to know what the mission is, what the vision is, why you exist, what you stand for, what your goals are. Well, I think families are no different. If you want to have a successful family, you need to operate it as a business in that way. Everyone in your family needs to understand. We want to have a family that respects each other. We want to have a family that values education, those types of things. So those are the expectations, and I think most families tend to have that down. The second level is rules. And a lot of families, too, have a lot of rules. Some families even post the rules on the refrigerator. There are good rules and there are bad rules. A good rule has to be binary. What do I mean by that? A good rule is either done or it's not done. One of the best examples I can think of, I live in New York City, one of the best examples I can think of is the parking authority. You know where your car is parked because at some point when you parked it illegally, you got a ticket. And that ticket came and it was a big ticket and it got your attention. And the rules in New York City parking are binary. You can park on alternate sides of the street. You know exactly what hours you can start and what hours you have to move your car. Rules have to be binary, which means, for example, a clean sink looks like this. There's nothing in it. If there's one fork in the sink, it ain't clean. This is what a made bed looks like. Take a picture of it. Children, by the way, just so you know, your children are good people. They're smart. But they all get up in the middle of the night and they escape to a university somewhere that teaches them how to find back doors and loopholes in your rules. And then they come back and they fight you on these rules. Their brains are exploding with abstract thinking by the time they reach their teenage years. So expect your children to challenge your rules. If your rule is vague, they're going to find a back door, they're going to find a loophole in your rules. So that's why rules need to be binary. Here's a good example. Don't come home late. That's a terrible rule. It's a terrible rule because there's no timestamp on it. So parents, when it comes to rules, not only do they have to be binary, done or not done, you need to have a timestamp on it. The timestamp means this is the time by which that rule needs to be done. So don't be home after midnight means don't be home after midnight. But even that's not clear enough. This is going to sound kind of crazy to you, but your whole body has to be on this side of that door when that clock says 12:00 a.m. You can't defeat that rule. The child knows exactly what's expected because otherwise, you know what you get? And teenagers, if you're watching this video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If your parent says, don't be home after midnight, comes midnight, you're texting your parent at midnight, I'm on my way home. That's what teenagers do. And the parents get upset and it becomes a fight. I just say, let's just cut through all of that. Create a rule that's binary and understand what that rule looks like when it's complete. So now we've got expectations, the mission, vision statement. We've got rules. Rules have to be binary. It helps if those rules have timestamps. Now we're talking about the hardest level. Pay attention to what I'm about to tell you, parents, because consequences is the level that's the most important in this whole series. You can have all the rules you want. You can have very lofty expectations and mission statements in your family, but if you have no way of enforcing the rules, or as a parent, if you don't enforce the rules, there are no such rules. If I parked in front of a fire hydrant in Manhattan and I didn't get a parking ticket, I just found myself a new parking space. So parents, if you don't enforce the rules with your kids are going to test you. It doesn't mean they're bad kids, it's just they're designed to test boundaries. They want to see, are you really serious about that rule? Are you actually going to hold me accountable for my behavior? So parents, you must enforce consequences, and you must enforce the consequences consistently. And by consistently, I mean if you live in a two-parent household or if there are multiple caregivers in your household, all the caregivers have to be on the same page and enforcing the rules together, jointly, consistently. And you also have to make sure that you're enforcing the consequences consistently over time. If you enforced it today, you got to enforce it next week. And if you enforce it with one child, you have to enforce it with all of the children in your household. Okay, so parents, so these principles, expectations, rules, and consequences, these are elements of evidence-based parenting strategies. And again, these are three areas that we could boil down from thousands and thousands of books and journal articles on effective parenting strategies. But something happened when we put devices in our kids' hands. Parents started to see an increase and a rise in disrespectful behavior, kids becoming less responsible, and a lot of parents, for that reason, use a phrase that I detest. Listen carefully, I'm going to tell you, parents, I'm going to teach you some language that I want you to erase from your vocabularies, and I'm going to teach you some words that I want you to use, because believe it or not, these words matter and will definitely help you to be more effective as a parent with your child. So let's talk about what these words are. The first set of words that I don't like is, I am going to take that away. I'm going to take away your phone. How many parents have used those words with their kids? I get it. I'm sure I've used that word myself. But catch yourself, because you don't want to use the words take away. The reason for that is that as a parent, if you say you're going to take away your child's device, you are going to become the bad object. Your child is going to be angry at you because you're the one doing something horrible to them. You are inflicting pain on them. So what's an alternative to taking away the device? The alternative is you will lose the device. So in an earlier video, I talked about three sets of behaviors that are very important: safe, responsible, and respectful behaviors. If your child is behaving unsafe, if they're irresponsible, and they're disrespectful, on what planet do we live on that they should be allowed to thumb up and down through TikTok and social media right in front of you when they treat you the way they treat you? Or if they haven't done their homework, or if they're failing their classes? That makes no sense whatsoever. And I work with a lot of parents, when they get to that point, they say, I'm going to take that away. And then the child gets mad at them, and then there's an argument and there's back and forth. Now there's a nuance to this, because there should be an agreement between parent and child that you can earn certain privileges as long as you're doing X, Y, and Z, as long as you're safe, as long as you're respectful, and as long as you're responsible and taking care of your responsibilities. I believe that children should be able to earn reasonable privileges with limits that are reasonable if they're safe, if they're responsible, and if they're respectful to the same people who are paying for their devices, paying for the roof over their head, paying for their education, paying for their food, paying for their Starbucks. So I do think it's important to have that relationship between a parent and a child. So children should be able to earn, teenagers should be able to earn, but they should also lose if they're not safe, if they're not respectful, and if they're not responsible. So parents, stop using the phrase take away, because then your child can be angry at you. So what the language should look like is, if you don't hand over your phone in the next 5 seconds, that's disrespectful to me, and you will lose your phone privileges. That's how that interaction should take place. And I notice that's a very difficult thing for a lot of parents to do, but that's something that I want to make sure that you practice. So lose the privilege, earn the privilege. These are not rights, these are privileges. So parents, teach your children to be accountable for their own behaviors through the language that you use. When you say take away, you are the one who's accountable for your child's behavior. When you tell the child you have lost a privilege because you didn't do certain things that you needed to do, you're teaching them to take accountability and responsibility for their own behaviors. That is part of healthy social emotional development, and that's why you want to use those words. So another question parents ask me, well, what should the consequences be if my child is disrespectful to me or if they're irresponsible? They get really mad. Sometimes they even threaten to hurt me or hurt themselves if they lose their privilege, or if I say I'm going to take away their screen. Well, parents, I should mention one thing that's very important. If your child, and I think this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, if your child is threatening to hurt themselves, if they're threatening to hurt you, you need to take them to an emergency room, and they need to be evaluated by a professional, because we certainly don't want them hurting themselves. We don't want them hurting you. But think about it. This is the hold that the screens have on your child. So if your child has gotten to that level, we all need to take a big step back and say, what is going on here? But some parents will say, what should a reasonable consequence be? Well, parents, even though I'm offering you some suggestions and some tips for parenting, I'm not going to tell any parent how to parent your child. You are the parent in your household. You get to determine what you think the consequences are. For example, if your child is disrespectful for you, if they don't put the phone in your hand when you put it out within 5 seconds, one example of a consequence could be that they would lose that phone privilege for the next 12 hours. You might make it 24 hours. That really depends on your household. But 12 hours might be a fair start. 6 hours might be a fair start. But here's what I will tell you. Whatever you determine that consequence to be, make sure that you are following through with that consequence. Because a lot of parents, they'll make empty threats. Empty threats are the worst thing that you can do with your child. If you have a consequence, make sure you follow through on that consequence. And lastly, the most important thing, when the time is up and it's time for the child to earn that phone back, a lot of kids will walk up to their parent with anger still, after cursing out their parent or after they did whatever they did to lose that privilege. They go back to the parent after the 12 hours are up and they say, give me my phone back. And guess what some parents do? They look helpless and they put their hands up in the air and they say, okay, I guess, yeah, 12 hours is up. And the kid snatches it back, turns their back and walks away with an angry look on their face, and there's no healing. Nothing has happened between the parent and child that has demonstrated any learning about what just happened. So parents, pay attention to what I'm about to talk to you about, because this is one of the most important elements of how to follow through with the consequence with your child. Let's talk about the full apology. What is a full apology? Well, a full apology has 3 elements to it: saying sorry, feeling sorry, and doing sorry. And I can't tell you how many parents I've worked with, how many parents I've observed who give their kids privileges back and their kid has never apologized for what they did when they lost that privilege. And to me, that makes no sense. And I talk to the parents themselves. They think it makes no sense either, but they don't know what to do. So parents, I want to give you a very important step in this process that's going to help you heal and hopefully decrease the amount of arguments you have with your child and improve your relationship with your child. So let's talk a little bit about the full apology. When your child is ready to earn back their privilege, let's say they lost their phone for 12 hours because they disrespected you the night before. Well, even though the 12-hour timestamp is up and it's time for them to earn back their privilege, there's one very important thing they still need to do. They need to make things right. They should apologize to you. And a lot of parents don't expect that of their children. Instead, the parents don't have that conversation with their child. The child just takes back the phone. But here's what it would look like. The parent should say, before you earn that back, you also have to apologize to me with a full apology. This means the child has to say, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what I said. Now, we all know there are a lot of kids, there's a lot of teenagers even, and this is what the apology looks like. I'm sorry. I said I'm sorry. And the parent will say, well, that doesn't sound very, well, I said I'm sorry. And sometimes another parent will say, they said they're sorry, and they should get the phone back. And then they walk off, and then now the parents are arguing because the child has their phone, and the parents can't figure out what just happened right there. So parents, if you're paying attention to this video, both be on the same page. Everybody needs to understand that the apology needs to be saying, it's not just the words, but it's the music. And sometimes a kid will ask me, or a teenager, well, how will they know I feel sorry? Anybody that's been on the receiving end of an apology knows whether you actually feel the person's sincerity. There's a very simple way of telling whether or not an apology is sincere. Ask the person who you just apologized to, do they feel your sincerity? If the answer is no, you didn't give a sincere apology. Go back to your room, figure out what you can do better, come back and deliver a sincere apology. And if you ask the receiver of the apology, did that feel sincere? They'll tell you yes. You know, one of the things I love about the Spanish language is that sorry in Spanish is lo siento. Literally translated, it means I feel it. And I love that because this tells the person who sent the apology, I received your apology, I feel it, let's move on. But there's still a third part. The third part is doing sorry. What does doing sorry mean? This is the hardest thing for kids to do. And parents, you've got to make it to this level. Doing sorry means your child can look at you in the eye and tell you not only what they did, but why it was wrong. And a pledge to do better. And a pledge not to do that same thing again. It's a way of telling the parent, hey, I recognize where we went wrong, where I went wrong, and the next time this situation happens, here's how I'm going to handle it a little bit differently. That's doing sorry. Now, I would tell you, parents, if your child can say sorry and you feel their sincerity and they can explain to you what they're going to do differently, you've got what I call a full apology, and I would say that child has earned back their device. They should be able to move forward with the privilege and go from there. I'm Dr. Mike Fraser. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button so we can spread this information to more parents, and stay tuned for more good content.